Why do people believe weird things? Now, to be clear, by weird, I mean things that conflict with the best available evidence.
Because after all, the more something conflicts with the best available evidence, the weirder it seems, right?
Like believing the English monarchy are lizard people, or believing that the earth is flat. So some of the most fun research that I've ever done has been with the flat earth community. And in case you're curious, no, they're not trolling. They really do believe that the earth is flat. But this isn't to talk about why they believe weird things or why specific communities of people believe weird things. This is a talk about how we all can, how we all do. And
specifically, it's talk about how even the most knowledgeable
people can believe weird things. Because the most surprising thing I learned
with studying the flat earth community wasn't what
people believed, but it was who they were and how they got there. Most of the people whom I interviewed, they didn't start out believing that the earth is flat. They didn't stumble into it through ignorance or lack of education. In fact, a third of our interviewees at the Flat Earth International Conference held graduate degrees, some in engineering, some in healthcare. And some of them could explain optics and orbital mechanics better than my high school physics teacher. And they didn't lack media literacy knowledge either. Most of them described to me opening up multiple browser tabs, reading about flat earth from a variety of different sources, what we call in media literacy education, lateral reading. They knew about clickbait, they know about misinformation, and I love this, but one of our interviewees said he felt he had to be particularly vigilant because there's a lot of misinformation in the truther community. And the reason that people said that they started watching flat earth videos is for a reason that many of us completely understand. They were curious. In fact, a lot of people said that they set out to debunk the videos before becoming flat earthers themselves. Now, the reason why I like to talk about flat earth with respect to weird beliefs is because most people don't personally believe that that's true. This allows audiences to take a step back, suspend defensiveness, focus not on which claims we're labeling misinformation, and instead think more about the mechanisms that lead people to adopt and maintain these types of beliefs. Because the most valuable thing that we can ask ourselves when thinking about issues like these is, when am I falling into similar patterns of thinking? When am I being a flat earther? So the core issue here of what all of us have experienced feeling is that we all want to believe things are true. People don't go around saying, I want to believe false things. No, people want to believe things that are true, but we sometimes end up believing things that are false. And believing in weird things, things that are false, have real world consequences, such as poor decision making. If we base our important decisions based on false information, whether it's about finances or politics or healthcare, we can end up making choices that can harm ourselves or other people. Also, we have issues with erosion of trust. When people are exposed to misinformation, it can undermine trust in reliable sources like experts and scientists, medical professionals, journalists, and educational institutions, making it harder for the truth to catch up and regain credibility. We also see issues with social and democratic harms, where misinformation can start circling through social groups, increasing polarization and discrimination, and in some cases, support for really harmful policies. A society that can't even agree on the same set of facts struggle to solve shared problems. So it's no wonder why this is a concerning issue to all of us. So what can we do about it? To a small subset of people, there's an intuitive answer, right? All we need to do is improve education, increase literacies. And for a long time, scientists and educators have held the opinion that if people reject, for example, scientific conclusions, it's because they simply didn't understand the science. To them, the solution seems obvious, right? We give people more information, clearer explanations, less jargon, pretty graphs. But if this was the case, we would have solved the problem already. This way of thinking even has a name. It's called the knowledge deficit hypothesis. And the knowledge deficit hypothesis basically said that, at least in the case of science, if people understood the science, they'd believe the science. Or for any idea, if they understood it, then they would believe the facts surrounding it. But social scientists, including myself, have debunked this over and over and over again. And to be clear, knowledge matters, education matters, science literacy, media literacy, cultural literacy, other literacies do matter. The problem is, they may be necessary, but they're not sufficient to solve the problem of believing false beliefs. There's a variety of other issues that have to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, we're just putting a Band-Aid on one or two holes of a very holy bucket. So let's take a look at what we mean by knowledge deficit hypothesis and what it predicts. So here on the horizontal axis, we have knowledge. Now, this could be general knowledge or intelligence, domain-specific knowledge like science literacy, or even years of education. We are examining similar things. On the vertical axis, we have chance of acceptance. And in the case of scientific findings, this would be the likelihood of accepting, for example, evolution or a globe-shaped Earth or any sort of finding from science. And what we would predict is this. So as knowledge increases, so does the likelihood of accepting that scientific finding. So let's take a look at some real data. So in the case of climate change, there are vast amounts of converging scientific evidence that the climate is getting warmer much faster than expected because of human activity. And we call this scientific consensus. Now, according to the knowledge deficit model, we would expect that as science literacy increases, so does the likelihood of accepting this. And at lower ends of scientific literacy, we see that people are less likely to accept this. And this is the data we see. We see a slight positive relationship. And for those people in here who like statistics, yes, this is statistically significant. But this is not the whole story. The strongest predictor of climate change attitudes, particularly in the United States, is not knowledge. It's political ideology. And if we took this same figure, or this data right here, which represents an average across all of our participants along science literacy, and instead divided it out, so we had an average line for people who typically vote for Democrats and an average line for people who typically vote Republican, what would we see? A clear example of political polarization. Democrats who have ideologically predisposed to be concerned about climate change since the 1990s, as scientific literacy increases, so does their likelihood of accepting anthropogenic climate change. But for political conservatives or people who typically vote Republican, who ideologically are predisposed to be more skeptical of climate change, they become less likely to accept anthropogenic climate change with increasing science literacy. Same measure of science literacy, opposite effects. And this isn't because one group suddenly forgot the science. It's because we use our reasoning abilities and our knowledge to be even better at motivating our own perspectives. So again, knowledge, media literacy, science literacy, all of these literacies may be necessary, but they're not sufficient to prevent people from believing misinformation. So why else do we believe in misinformation? Well, there's a variety of reasons. One is our existing priors. We come into the world, we have existing values, beliefs, knowledge, identities, and we view new information through a filter of these priors. When information conflicts with those existing priors, we become more likely to question or in some cases outright reject them, even if they're true. We also have cognitive biases, and there's so many of these. But one example is the illusory truth effect. When you see something really often, repetition breeds familiarity. When something is familiar, it feels true, even when it's not. We have trust and social influence. We're more likely to believe information, even if it's inaccurate, if it's coming from people who we like or people we identify with. This can be our friends, our family members, people of our social and political groups, or even celebrities. We also have our information environment, and there's a variety of different issues regarding this. For one, we know, for example, that misinformation spreads faster and more broadly than the corrections to it, and especially online when algorithms reward engagement over accuracy. And at the same time, we have people encountering information in increasingly fractured and politically polarized environments where echo chambers just reinforce our existing priors, our existing beliefs, and at the same time filter out diverse opinions so we don't feel as uncomfortable. But we also have problems with equitable access to credible information. Some people just don't have access, whether it's because of paywalls for information or low media infrastructure, like lack of local news, or digital divides, making it difficult for people to even verify whether information that they come across is true or not. And then lastly, bad actors and propaganda. We all know that there are people and organizations that spread misinformation, false information on purpose for either political or financial or even ideological gain. But what's more concerning to me, for example, is that even knowing that bad actors exist can give people a feeling of generalized cynicism, so that they assume all media, all public serving institutions can't be trusted because they're biased or corrupt or deceptive. But today, I really want to focus on things that we can control. One of the things that we can control as individual seekers of information is recognizing that we're all motivated reasoners, that we're all looking at information through the lens of our own views and values and prior knowledge. Motivated reasoning is not stupid or irrational. It is normal, it is rational, and it is human. Our brains are very good at protecting our moral commitments, our identities, our understanding of the world, and even our self-perceptions of being reasonable human beings. And when we are exposed to information that seems inconsistent with or challenges that notion, we don't merely evaluate it. Sometimes we actively push back against it. And the uncomfortable truth is, the better we are at reasoning, the more knowledge and skills we have, the better we are at motivating our own perspectives, at motivated reasoning. And this is why doing our own research doesn't necessarily protect us from being duped. In some case, it makes us just more confident in the wrong direction. And this is exactly what we saw with the Flat Earth movement. They didn't abandon critical thinking. In many cases, they applied it selectively. What many of the people in the Flat Earth movement have in common, despite differences in education and occupation and gender and geography, is a deep distrust in people and organizations that hold positions of power. Prior to being exposed to Flat Earth videos on YouTube, these individuals already held a conspiratorial mindset. They were watching videos calling school shootings false flag operations, videos that said 9/11 was an inside job. And so when YouTube surfaced these videos to them, they were showing these videos to people for whom those ideas were already going to resonate. Because after all, when you already have a conspiratorial worldview, then arguments that the shape of the earth is not what we think it is, or that scientists are lying to you, is consistent with beliefs about corrupt governments, untrustworthy elites, and in some cases, more biblical interpretations of reality. And this is where science knowledge in particular becomes really interesting, because some of the most committed Flat Earth believers were engineers or people with very highly specialized technical expertise. And they didn't abandon experimentation. In fact, many of them conducted some very sophisticated experiments that aimed to test if the Earth was flat. But those hypotheses were not supported by their experiments. Instead of stopping and saying, wait, maybe this data fits better with a globe Earth model, they thought, no, we must have been doing something wrong. In this case, scientific reasoning was still actively present, but it was operating in service of a motivated conclusion. And this matters because it complicates a very comforting story that many of us tell ourselves, particularly in educated settings. It says, if we just learn a lot, if we check a bunch of sources, if we employ critical thinking and media literacy skills, then we can trust our own judgment. We can know what's true. But the flat earth case shows us that belief formation isn't that simple. That's not really how it works. We do evaluate information through the lenses of our own views, values, prior knowledge, and identities. And evidence doesn't speak for itself. It can't, because we act as the biased filters for that information. And in a fragmented media environment where so many things are polarized and everybody's being exposed to different information, it becomes nearly impossible for any one of us to be perfect reasoners or to perfectly evaluate information. And we all struggle to do this, not because we lack intelligence or knowledge, but because we're human. And this is just how we think. So what do we do with this? We don't abandon skepticism. We don't abandon science or critical thinking. We don't assume that being educated or knowledgeable makes us immune to believing weird things. Instead, we become more honest about what actually does shape belief. This means being cautious about assuming that doing our own research can replace the collective work of the scientific community and domain experts. It means paying attention to what makes information persuasive to us and how identity, group membership, and trust, what makes sense, what makes information credible. And that means asking ourselves some uncomfortable questions, like, would I trust this information if it came from somebody else? Or where are my blind spots? Or what assumptions do I hold? And these questions may not make us perfect thinkers, but they will make us more reflective ones. Because in the end, believing weird things isn't a flaw that other people have. It's something that we all do. It's a feature of being human. And in a world where information is abundant and trust is fragmented, sometimes knowing how we come to believe becomes more important than actually knowing what's true. Thank you.